Good morning, everyone. This is Ron Visconti, and I'm with Phase 2 Careers. And we've got a great panel today talking about self-publishing your book. And we'll introduce them in just a moment. But a few little announcements here before we go into the program. A little bit about Phase 2 Careers. If you're new to Phase 2 Careers, we're a nonprofit for the over 40 worker. Professional, we do job search, career development, networking, and some small business activities. Now, the program today is a little bit different, but when you think about it, it really affects if you're a consultant, having a book would be helpful. So there's a lot of connector points to the topic today. And just to tell you a little bit of what we have coming up this week, we have a very busy week. Tomorrow, we have a panel talking about interviewing tips for your job search. On Thursday, we have Kickstart Your Business if you're starting a business. And on Saturday, we're doing a Saturday class on customizing your job search. That's going to be in the morning. So lots to look at with Phase 2, and we're doing a lot more small business classes with Renaissance. At this point, I'd like, was there a question? Okay, at this point, I'd like to welcome Roz and tell us a little bit more of what's going on, Roz.
Thanks, Ron, and thanks so much for doing this program today. Of course, I am a promoter of authors at all times and feel like a lot of business people in many stages of their careers consider publishing and self-publishing as a great way of doing something creative or doing something as a marketing tool or doing something just out of passion because it's something they love. And all of those are great reasons to consider self-publishing. I am the coordinator of library programming at the library in Redwood City, and I also do adult services and outreach. And I do committee work, and I select both fiction and nonfiction in ebooks for the whole system. And I wanted to just touch on a couple of things in terms of a service that might be useful to you. Data Axle is a database. If you haven't tried it, you can use it for marketing. So if you're interested in self-publishing and you're looking for companies that could help you with that, try Data Axle. Everyone who has a library card in San Mateo County can use that database. It was formerly known as Reference USA, and you can access it from the website of any library in San Mateo County. So just look on the website where it says online resources, or mostly people call it online resources or reference services or get it online or something like that. And it'll say Data Axle, or if they haven't updated it yet, it'll say Reference USA. And you'll be able to access it. And then usually it'll ask you for your library card number and PIN number, and you'll be able to search by self-publishing. You will be able to search by a company name, and you can find out, by company size, by CEO, and then you can get contact information, and you can even look for jobs in that field. So I find it really useful to be able to look for that kind of company information. And I wanted to show you a couple of upcoming programs that we're having at the library that are listed here, and to also just mention at the end of September on the 28th, Phase 2 Careers and the library are sponsoring a program at 10:15, Millennial Recruiters, how to work with them and get hired. And I'm really excited about that program. I think that if I were looking for a job right now, that's a program that I would definitely want to attend. I'm really looking forward to it. It can be a stumbling block. So put that on your calendar. Hope to see you there and hope to see you. The financial planning program may be of interest to some of you or to someone you know. If you have any questions, just general questions about your financial plan, you're welcome to join us for that program. It's sponsored by Silicon Valley Financial Planning Association, and they're not selling any particular products or recommending any particular products. And hope to see you soon at any of our programs. Thank you.
The library is a great resource for lots of things. And boy, I'd put that would be close to my heart, Roz's email, because she's a great person to reach out to. So thank you, Roz, and thank you, the Friends of the Redwood City Library. So we have a pretty complete panel today. We have Nancy Branca, who wrote the book Employee 6 is 54, which is fiction, great book. Audrey Kallman, several books, Tiny Shoes Dancing, What Remains Unsaid, Dance of Souls. We have Dr. David Petrobey, who has Life Between Jobs, Out of Work, Not Out of Worth, great book. All the books that I've read, and I'll have to read yours, Audrey, or your books. And Dr. Sarah Hart, nonfiction, which is Prime Spark, Women Over 55, It's Our Time, another great book. Before we get started, I thought the format would be is they would tell their story, how they got started, and maybe a lesson they learned about self-publishing. Then we'll open it up to questions. But I want to do a few polls here just to see those in our audience, what's your purpose? What's your primary reason for self-publishing? And like to call upon our panelists. Is it to have control over your book? Is it speed, to be done quickly, to have greater financial benefit, to make yourself an authority for your legacy? Or if there's something different, put it in the chat. So I'm going to end the poll in just a couple minutes. Can someone add the registration link in the chat, please? Is anyone able to do that?
I'm doing that, Ron.
Okay, perfect. So give just a couple seconds more and then we'll close the poll. And I'm going to share the results of those that did give. Well, Sarah, you're on the top of the screen there, so I'll go to you first. Does any of that surprise you? That the primary reason is to be an authority in your field? You might unmute.
Yeah, sorry. To be an authority in your field, I would think that, yes, it does surprise me, Ron, in terms of self-publishing. It doesn't surprise me in terms of publishing. In terms of self-publishing, I would have thought the reasons would have to have more control and speed and financial benefits. So for the self-publishing portion of it.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking of just self-publishing. How about you, David? Did any of the polls surprise you? It's a small sample. Not everyone answered the poll. You have to unmute, David.
Well, certainly being an authority in the field really comes from what your purpose is. If you're doing nonfiction, I could see where that would be one of the #1 reasons. Doing fiction, I suppose that would be more in terms of a genre. We certainly have, famous people who have, in some ways, monopolized their areas that they are writing in. And, you look at people like the writer of all the Harry Potter books. And, certainly she has become an expert in that genre. So I thought, again, along with what Dr. Sarah Hart was saying, that it would be about control. And also I've learned it's about speed, how long it takes to go through a traditional publisher and how little control you have over that process versus when you self-publish. And I'll talk more about that later.
Okay, thanks for that insights. How about you, Nancy, and then you, Audrey, any surprises on the poll?
I've written fiction, so kind of echo what has already been said. I can see that as a nonfiction writer, the goal of establishing yourself or supporting your authority in the field. I'm not sure that a book establishes your authority unless, as perhaps Sarah said, you are published by a traditional publisher and have a big hit. But I do think nonfiction books can support your authority in a field, especially if you're a speaker or something like that.
Okay, thanks for that. Audrey, anything that you want to put on that list that wasn't put on the list of primary reasons?
No, although I'm going to take off my fiction writer hat and put on my editing, consulting, marketing hat, because I wear many hats, and just say that I actually think, I mean, I may be surprised that people in the audience are so well informed, because for me, I often work with clients who are in the corporate world, and that is one of their primary reasons why they might want to hire me to edit, is because they have a self-published book, because they want to establish their authority. I just worked with a woman last year who has done that and has actually launched a very large nonprofit organization kind of based on that. So I see that all the time, actually, that even though it's not a traditionally published book, there is a measure of authoritativeness that simply comes from having a book out there in the world. So yeah, I'm not surprised, but I do think that, yeah, the speed and the control issues are also extremely important, whether you're publishing fiction or nonfiction.
Okay, and thank the panel for that. Just and I'm getting a couple of these polls just so we could learn more about the audience. What's the biggest obstacle, do you think, to self-publishing? Marketing, money, competition, quality? Option 5, I should have put in whatever you wish. And we'll get to your question in a moment, Sue, as well. So just so far, just a few people voting, but I'm going to close the poll because maybe some of you might be having trouble voting, but it seems like we'll start with you, Nancy. Marketing seems to be a fear people might have.
Yes, I would echo that as well. That's the biggest challenge for me, but it also does kind of tie to competition, right? Because everyone is vying for the attention of the similar audiences. So anyway, that's not at all surprising to me, and I would have answered the same.
And how about you, Audrey? Something missing on that poll that we should know about that you would consider as an obstacle?
I think maybe it kind of goes along with marketing and money, which is the fact that when you self-publish, you kind of have to become your own corporation and you basically are running your own business. And so you need everything that a business would have. And you do actually have to make some investments. I mean, you can do it without making investments, but that's when you know, that makes it really hard to stand out from the competition. So yeah, so I think all of these things are can be obstacles for sure.
How about you, Sarah, and then you, David? Any thoughts about obstacles?
From the people I've spoken to over the months and couple of years, Ron, I would have thought knowing how to do it, knowing where to go, knowing, I mean, what the options are, just basic information. And I just want to mention, this was really funny. This just whizzed across my internet that Zoom is now doing a seminar on lessons learned from self-publishing. So if anybody wants to find that, it's there.
Well, thank you for that. David, Roz just made a comment, the investment of time. Do you want to talk about that or address that? That could be an obstacle.
Well, I think that you really have to be good at, how you parcel out your time, as Rosalind was saying, because one of the things that I've learned was it's taking me more time to promote or market the book than it did to write it.
Mm.
Because it's a constant effort, always finding out where people are doing the marketing, what best marketing practices are, how you build on what your skills are around marketing. Because I think many of us, unless we're experts in marketing to begin with and are writing a book about it, it's a steep learning curve. Because you think, and I know other people who have written have done this, it's like, well, I published it, it'll market itself. And that's not the case. They sold very few books, especially if you're a new author. I'm involved in so many different ways of marketing that I'll talk about later and share those experiences with you, but I just did not realize how much time it consumed. And if you're doing other jobs, like for myself, doing coaching and doing speaking, then you have to budget that in terms of making sure that you're doing it, but not at the expense of other roles that you might play.
So important point, Roz and David, about time. And Sue, you had a question, and then you had a question, Sue, and then we'll get to our panelists to introduce their book.
Thank you. Those are all great comments, but I was just wondering whether like later in this presentation, you can go into like, what's the pros and cons about, self-publishing versus, find a company to work with. I think that would be great. And then also the cost perspective, like if you self-publish, like how much that you have to kind of upfront. Those details like that, because I'm totally new to this topic.
Good.
And I'm not more interested in like publishing in nonfiction.
Nonfiction, okay. And maybe we could address that, the pros and cons of fiction versus nonfiction. So thank you for that. So just one more poll, and then we'll go into our speakers to tell us about it. I'm curious from the group, where you are along your self-publishing line. Are you been thinking about it, started writing to early stages, halfway done, completed the book? And this is just for our panelists, so you could be able to understand our audience. Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. And I'm going to close the poll. And it seems like most people, one person seemed to complete their book and they're ready to launch, and others are thinking about it and shared writing are at the early stages. So thank you for all of the information you gave. So now I want to backtrack a little bit and just do this by panel. And Roz made a comment, people who believe their book make a long-term planning for promoting the book. She's worked with authors for over 20 years. So it's not just a short-term project, it's a long-term project. Thanks for that point, Roz. Nancy, do you want to tell us who you are, how you got started on the book, and anything that you learned along the way?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. I have always worked as a writer or editor for most of my career in publishing, and then the last piece of it with heading up content for a startup. And I had self-published maybe 10 years ago, a couple of romance novels under a pen name. And then, so I had a little bit of experience with self-publishing. And then when I left the startup that I worked at, working there had been a really interesting experience because I was by far the oldest person there by about 20 to 30 years. And so I had been very interested in like the generational differences in how we thought about things and what experience brings to work. And also I was surprised at how different working at a startup was from working at more traditional companies, as I always had. And all along, I kind of wished that someone had like just sat me down and in 1 hour kind of outlined everything to me about that I need to know about venture capital and about software development and vocabulary and stuff like that. So when I left the startup, I launched a website called startupdecoder.com. And it's for people who are mid and late career who are interested in working at startups or working in tech. And it's mostly my attempt to kind of do what I wished I had when I was starting at a startup. But alongside that, I had this idea that if I wrote fiction, as was just something that I enjoyed, that another way to get across that information was through a novel. And that might appeal to people that wouldn't be sitting and reading articles on a website. So I had this idea and also kind of building on my own experience and having a story to tell, I felt like from my own experience being an older person, getting a job at a startup. So I had the idea for the novel. I wrote the draft during National Novel Writing Month in 2019, I believe. And I think we'll talk about resources later, but I'm a huge fan of National Novel Writing Month. I find it's really helpful. It's basically a structure, and then you can use it for nonfiction as well, where people all over the world focus on writing during that month, and you quote unquote win the month. You win the National Novel Writing if you write 50,000 words, and they have during the course of that month, and they have some great tracking tools and stuff, and a great community. So I found that really helpful to write that first draft. And then over the course of the next year, I worked on editing it and then launched it in August of last year, so about a year ago. And so now I'm in the marketing process. And as I mentioned, that's a whole different ball game, and it's fun to learn and challenging, and all in all, I'm really enjoying it. And then thinking about my next book. And in terms of just like the most salient lesson that I think I've learned in this process is to really get real about my expectations. It is I find it very hard to make money, like even to get profitable with a book. And I'm a very practical person. So I did not expect to be a best-selling author or anything like that. But your ego is somewhat tied up in your sales, and it can be hard to unhook from that. And so it just really helped me when somebody said, well, why did you write the book? And, when I really got down to it, it was because I had a story to tell. And I also wanted to learn how to do it and become a better writer. So it helped me a lot to realize that no matter how the sales are, I've accomplished what I set out to do. So that's my lesson.
Thank you for Nancy. And interesting twist. Really learning about the high-tech world and telling the story through fiction rather than just doing a nonfiction book. So that's kind of an interesting way of telling the story. And we'll have an open Q&A just after all of our panelists present. Audrey, you've written several fiction books. You want to tell us a little bit more about your journey?
Sure. Well, yeah, I, like Nancy, I've been writing all my life, and took a little detour for a while into the tech world, corporate communications, marketing. So I have that as a background, and I still do some consulting and editing in those areas in the business world, as well as for fiction writers. But I came to self-publishing. Oh, I also have a background in traditional publishing. Many years ago, I worked for a publishing company in Boston, Little Brown Publishing. So I have that in my background as well. But about, I don't know, 12 years ago, 2010, I think it was, I had finished a novel and I was looking around for, okay, I want to get it out into the world. And I realized from my traditional publishing experience how long a process that might be if I went about finding an agent and going through all the rigmarole. And at that time, self-publishing was just getting started, and there were lots of interest around it. And I thought, okay, I would like to learn about this, and I have a book to get out there. I'm going to dive in. And I also, similar to Nancy, I tried to really keep my expectations in check. I said, okay, the reason I'm doing this is, one, to learn about self-publishing, and two, to get my book in a form that my friends and family can easily read it and I don't have to send them a big PDF. so those were my expectations. And I can say that those were met. I can also say that I have not been able to retire to the Caribbean on the money I have made from that book or any other book, but I did learn a lot. And actually it led me to that process, and having that experience and actually having a book out there led me to find a small independent publisher for my second novel, which is What Remains Unsaid. So I did have that experience too, of working with a small publishing company. And I'd be happy to talk, I don't know if you want me to talk now or maybe later, to address the question somebody had asked about what's the difference between going it on your own and going it with a publishing company. And I have lots of thoughts on that, so I can share that later. And then I went back to self-publishing for my book of short stories, Tiny Shoes Dancing, although I did it in a little sneaky way, because if you look on there, you will see that it is published by an organization called Torella Media. And that is actually my husband's media company. And I chose to do that because there's, I think over the years, there's developed, it may be dissipating somewhat now, but at least in the beginning, a very intense reaction that many readers had, many critics had, to self-publishing, because of course with self-publishing there are no barrier or lower barriers to entry, so anyone can publish a book. So consequently, there can be many books out there that are not very carefully edited, that needed a lot of work but just got out into the world anyway. So I was trying to bring a little bit of the polish that you would expect from a traditionally published book to the brand of my book. So I chose to do it using my husband's company, even though he and I were the ones who actually did the work on that. And then I am now in the process of actually editing, getting another manuscript, a professional edit done on it, for which I do plan to look for an agent. I think it has a book that has a broader appeal. So to me, I kind of see self-publishing in the fiction world as part of my whole journey, and maybe a little bit of a stepping stone. And I should mention I have published yet another self-published book that is just coming out this summer on Amazon's platform, which is new in July, called Bella. And it's an episodic, a platform for publishing fiction, or I guess you could publish nonfiction, but I don't think too many people do that, episodically. So you release episodes, people buy the book by episode. The first 3 episodes are free, and then if you hook them in, they will presumably continue to read and then pay you for following episodes. So I have a book, which I guess I did that after I submitted my bio here, so that's not on my bio yet, but if you go to my website, you can see it. It's called The Last Storyteller. So that's kind of a different self-publishing experience, and that's through Amazon. So yeah, and I have, as I mentioned, worked with a lot of business people who, as part of their marketing of their business, want to publish books, and either try to, I've worked in both. So I've actually helped develop books that then got sold to publishers, and I've also helped edit and shape books that are then self-published.
So
that
you
was
have
a little bit about me.
just a variety of experiences, which is valuable. And we'll get into this. We'll dive into the weeds here. David, do you want to tell us a little bit of how your book got started?
Okay, thank you, Ron. Well, unlike Nancy and Audrey, I'm a newbie. when it comes to all of this. I never considered myself to be a writer. So if you're sitting in on this webinar, just recognize the fact that you don't have to be an accomplished, long-lived author in order to pursue self-publishing. I actually began the process of writing my first book back in 2013 when I presented to a group of C6 career searchers or job searchers. And as I listened to their responses, as I did this presentation, I thought afterwards, you know, I could keep doing this as a presentation, but there's so much meat to this. I'm wondering if it shouldn't be a book. I did a few more presentations and they fleshed out the content for me. So they gave me the outline of what their needs were psychologically as they went through the job search process. So my book was not about how to write the perfect resume, how to sit for and ace the interview. It was about what people go through psychologically when they are between jobs. And then I created a series of exercises that went along with each of the 6 areas that I addressed within the book. And people really like that because it's not just a sit and read. It's a sit and do book. You think about it and then you respond. So very introspective. And that started in 2013. I didn't actually publish the book until 2020. So it's just been out for a year. And as you know, both Nancy and Audrey talked about, some people may have the goal of being the next J.K. Rowling and making millions off of their books. We know that that typically, especially for a new person, isn't often the case. I figure if I break even in what I invested versus what I made, I'm doing well. And as far as being a writer, the best way to be a writer is to write. And it's to write constantly and consistently. That's what I learned. And to get feedback, because one of the things that I've done since 2010 is do a daily blog on my website. And that certainly gives me that practice. And people said to me, you know, what you write is so well written in such a concise paragraph. Have you ever thought about publishing? So right now I'm in the process of working with an editor on books number 2 and 3. So one of them will be a journal and one will be a supplementary workbook for the life between jobs. And it'll consist of primarily exercises to expand. So there are more books inside of me. Who would have known? And again, I think the big thing is the marketing piece of it. And we'll talk, all of us, a little bit more about that later. So that's my journey into writing.
You know what I also like about your story is you're close to your consumer. So you hear what their needs are and you could put that in the book. So you're responding in the book to the need of your consumer. So you're close to your customer. Well, thank you for that, David. And we'll just, we want to hear from Dr. Sarah Hart, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Ron. Well, like David, I was a complete newbie at the whole thing. So I didn't have any background in publishing or getting books out. The Prime Spark Women Over 55, It's Our Time was actually my second book. My first book was The Upside of Downsizing, Getting to Enough. And it's about the emotional side of downsizing your home. I wrote that several years ago as a result of downsizing my own home. And I wrote and published both books in exactly the same way. And it's sort of a hybrid model. So I worked with a woman who is a coach publisher. And so I worked with her as a coach in writing, not so much the second book in terms of writing, I sort of did that, but in the first book. So she acted as a coach and an editor and a publisher. And so in both cases, I had somebody doing all of the technical part of it for me. Now, the cost of all of that is probably around $10,000. So it isn't cheap. But I knew that if I wanted to write a book, I needed to have somebody doing the technical part of it for me, because I would not do it. And so that's what I did. So I worked with her with both books. And what that means is that I would give her the transcript. She would do the editing, send it back to me. We went back and forth with that with many times. She had the designer who did the book covers. I paid the designer directly. Amy, who is the publisher, also gets it published. If I need books, I call her, she gets them shipped to me. So for me, it was definitely and still is a way to go. It's sort of you start writing and you just sort of keep writing. And so I've said several times, if I could find a patron to pay me to write, I would just write, because I just love to do it. And like everybody has said, I think it's important to realize that if you make money on it, oh, that's fantastic. But don't assume you will make very much money. My first book was actually a bestseller on Amazon in its small category. And I don't know if I have recouped all of the expense of getting the book out. I don't care, because what I have gotten back from it is feedback from people that has warmed my heart. But the final thing I would say about it is that the second book came out right during the pandemic. And so there you go. That was probably true for some of you also. But the first book, I did a lot of book readings and signings, and I did a lot of them at bookstores and sold a lot of books that way. Now, I don't know if this is still true. I don't know if it's always true. For me, it was always true that when I talked to the person in the bookstore about doing a book reading and signing, they asked me, who is your publisher and who is your distributor? And if I couldn't provide those two pieces of information, they weren't interested. So that was my experience. So that may not be always true, but that was what happened to me. I don't know how easy it is to publish your own book completely, because I haven't done it. For people who are, we all have different skills. Mine do not lie in technology. And so I knew I would not learn everything I had to learn to do all that myself. So the quasi method for me works brilliantly, and I would do it that way again.
Well, thank you for that, sir. And that's the hybrid model, as Audrey points out. And Audrey also points out, if you're a writer and want to learn of other writers and what they're doing, we have one locally, the California Writers Club on the peninsula, and they're all different areas. Wasn't it started by Jack London, Audrey, the California Writers Club?
Yes, actually right around here in 1909. So it's a venerable organization, and now there's 22 branches all over the state. And the SF Peninsula branch is certainly doing virtual events, and I think lots of others are too. So if you go to, I'll put the link to the statewide organization, and people can see what all the other branches are doing as well.
So
and
it's
I think
a
Nancy's a member too, she said.
Great networking, great to hear with people, and they have great topics every month. So something to think about. So thank you all for your stories, and it shared different pieces of things we should be learning about. So why don't we open this up to questions from our audience? Now it's time to hear from you, and let's see if we could tap the panel to see what your questions are. Did we address, for example, I believe her name was Sue, that asked about the pros and cons. Did we cover all the pros and cons? Audrey.
I think I mentioned, now I can't see her question, but I think it was about self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Oh, wait, she had her hand up and asked it out loud. That's why I can't see it. So I just will, I can speak really briefly to that. And I think some of it goes back to your questions in the beginning about the, what people expect to get out of it. And I think one big pro or two big pros are the control that you have and as a self-published author, and also how quickly you can move. Because as I said, I was involved in traditional publishing, and I think it's speeded up a little bit now, but it could take several years from the time you actually, get a book contract until the book is out in the world. It just, things move very slowly. There's a lot of processes that go on. And so there's the speed thing. And then as far as the control, I do know lots of traditionally published authors who, just look in horror at their cover or, the title that the publisher wanted them to use. So, those things, you basically give up control over a lot of that stuff, depending on who the publisher is. And then from my perspective, I'll just quickly say a couple of the sort of on the other side of things. I think working with somebody else, like Sarah's experience of even working with a hybrid publisher, which is not a traditional publisher, but when you are working with somebody else, you do have a partner in the whole venture. So you don't feel like you're so alone, and you're not figuring everything out by yourself. And you can kind of offload some things to the publisher. Although even with a traditional publisher, even with a big traditional publisher, as a smaller author, you are not, maybe even as a bigger author, you're going to still be responsible for a lot of your own marketing. So you're going to be doing a lot of the, spreading the word about your book, even if you have a publishing organization of a publishing company or marketing organization behind you.
Well, thank you for that. Sarah, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Audrey said, because that is my experience. And I know several people who have used well-known publishing houses and got no help in marketing. So that may not always happen for people, but if one of the reasons somebody wants to go with a publisher rather than self-publishing is to get the book marketed, don't count on that. And before you sign any contract, check it out, because it doesn't happen in my with new unknown authors, so far as I know. And just also to underscore what Audrey said, working with, and this could happen with a publishing house if you have an editor that you work closely with. But unless that happens, then working with a hybrid model with a coach, she is a partner all the way. And not only is it not doing it by yourself, but it's also having accountability. So we would have a meeting, like, I don't remember actually, but every other week. And I said that I would have X done by then. And I am much better at staying accountable to somebody else than myself. I don't seem to be able to change that. So for me, that was a biggie.
And that was affirmed by Audrey as well. Nancy or David, any other thoughts about self-publishing versus the traditional route?
Yeah, I would say that my experience with it was, once I had finished the book, I started out by approaching publishers. And after 3 thanks but no thanks, at least I got that from them. One of the comments was, "We see no timeliness to your book." Now, this was just pre-COVID, but thank goodness I published during the COVID time when this could have been an important topic. And they never came to me and let's reconsider this. So after those 3 rejections, I took Jack Canfield's tip, where he approached 144 publishers before someone finally agreed to Chicken Soup for the Soul. And we know that has sold millions of copies. So I thought, I'm going to avoid that pitfall. And so that's when I decided to do the self-publishing. What we know is, as people were pointing out, first of all, when you're doing traditional, my research showed that 99% of submissions are rejected. They tend to be looking for people who are already successful or have some type of topic that is just going to go through the roof. But for many of us, we don't have that luxury. And as people pointed out, it can take between 12 and 18 months for you to be published, where self-publishing, it's almost immediate. As soon as it's ready to go, it can be up on Amazon, ready to sell. There are complicated submission procedures. When you are going through a traditional publisher, they have strict proposal guidelines, and you need to meet all of them. And it is time consuming, and it's not a cut and paste. Every publisher has a different process that they use. So if you're looking at self, again, it's the speed, the control, your profit. You make more off of selling a self-published book than a traditionally published book. It's cheaper in the long run. And again, as people pointed out, you have much more control over the promotion and marketing. And also, as people pointed out, you still have to do a lot of your own marketing. They don't take that process over for you. So I thought, you know what? Given the fact that I wanted to get my book out there, self-publishing was the best way to do it.
So thank you for that, David. Very well thought out. Any final thoughts about this, Nancy?
Yeah, so I did the total do-it-yourself method. I did pay a designer for the cover, which I think is super important. But I think Sue had asked about this, that, how do you get started? And I just want to point out there are just so many resources online that can guide you, whether it's YouTube videos or writing. And so, I basically just started reading about how to do things. And now even, I just had to upload a revision to my book because I added book club discussion questions. And I had to refresh myself on how I was, going to get that upload going to the different distributors. So there are just so many great resources. And one place that I always recommend starting is Joanna Penn. That's Penn. And that is, she does fiction writing, but she also writes nonfiction about writing and self-publishing. And she has a lot of great books and content about how to get started in self-publishing. And also her podcast is great. And then Audrey mentioned, I do have a resource guide, which is more for like tech products that can help you as a writer. And I'll eventually get that in the chat.
Okay, that would be perfect. So let's open it up to questions. Looking for questions, but I'm going to ask a question while we get more questions coming in. There's Kindle and Amazon and all of that. Do any of you want to comment about that? I had a friend that did historical fiction rather. He did historical figures, and he was pretty known in the genre that he was doing. Anyone want to comment about Amazon or Kindle, or how that process takes place?
I'll be happy to start. I initially, for my previous books, I only did Amazon ebooks. For Employee 654, I started on Amazon with ebook and paperback. And Amazon has a program where you can be in Kindle Unlimited, but it's a commitment of 3 months that you need to be exclusive to Amazon. So I did that. And then since then, I've also published the book on Draft to Digital, which then has distribution to, that's for the ebook, to Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and a ton of other outlets, and Overdrive, so the library app. And then also I published it on Ingram Spark as paperback, so that has distribution to bookstores and some other outlets. But you have to be aware that if you do Amazon only, that booksellers will not, in general, buy your book from Amazon, as it's their main competitor. And so you need to think about that, whether it's worth it to you to just stay on Amazon when it makes it unavailable to a lot of other places.
Okay.
Thank you for mentioning distribution, Nancy. This is Roz. Sorry, I've lost my camera access temporarily, but I just wanted to mention the importance of library distribution, because although we're actually pretty mighty in reader numbers at the public libraries, when you think of how many readers there are at, say, San Francisco Public Library or New York City Public Library, Seattle Public Library, and you start to add up all of those readers, even Peninsula library system altogether, we buy an enormous number of ebooks. So it's really worth considering distribution when you're considering what ebook platform, and to go with an Overdrive / Libby if you possibly can right now, because that's the distribution channel of choice currently for most of those libraries. Thanks so much.
Roz, I was going to ask you a question, follow-up question. Since libraries are a great purchaser of books, of course, is there a way to have contact with librarians that purchase books just to get in their mindset, just to hear how they approach things?
Sure. I mean, you can just talk to us, but in terms of our committee decisions, there are Brown Act rules. You can certainly come to our committee meetings, but they're extremely boring. You know, they are open to the public, but we're making financial decisions just like anyone, like a school board. And what we are trying to do is keep always the public access in mind, and, you know, spend the dollars in a way that's providing access the best way that we possibly can. We're trying to get as many vendors as we possibly can so that we can provide access as best we can in the most affordable way that we possibly can. But, you know, beyond that, you can always just talk to us and tell us what you want. But you're welcome to attend our meetings if you have an idea. It's the Peninsula Library System Information Services Committee that considers the questions about ebooks.
I'm just throwing that out because maybe that will get people thinking a little bit of how they have to market and target their books. So thank you.
Totally. And there are other applications. I mean, the larger systems can afford more applications. And even PLS has Hoopla, and the county has more resources for ebooks and they have more applications.
Well, thank you for that. Does anyone on the panel that we haven't heard from want to address Kindle, Amazon, any of those issues? David? You're muted. Oh, there we go.
Okay. One of the things to consider, because I had to do this, was going from print to a digital ebook. And what's important is looking at the format of your book. I would think that doing something that was fiction, which was primarily text, would easily convert to an ebook. But with mine, I had charts and graphs and exercises where people were supposed to be writing. When we converted that, one of the people said, oh, I'll just, do a copy and convert. And right after she did that, luckily someone I know was the first person to read it and said, you have a disaster on your hands. Because when it converted, it changed the formatting completely to where sentences ran into charts, and I had to pull it off and then hire someone who was conversant in doing ebook conversion. And then she took it over, so that involved an extra cost. So those are the things that you want to think about. With my next two books, I'm not considering them as an ebook because of the formatting. I mean, the workbook is going to have even more spaces where people are going to want to write and keep a record of that. So I know an ebook, it is possible, But just in terms of the purpose of the book, these are the kinds of things you want to be thinking of. Because as I said, you may incur extra cost related to that.
No, thanks for sharing that experience. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? Yes, Sarah?
Yeah, I just want to underscore what David just said. My second book is a workbook, and I didn't do an ebook on that. The first one has exercises at the end of chapters, and Amy, my publisher, did the formatting on that for the ebook. But it was, in terms of the purpose of the book, it was fine with me, the first book, to have an ebook. The second one, I didn't want an ebook. I wanted people to have the book in their hands with the questions and all the places to answer. I mean, it's sort of a journal, and it's not a journal, but I mean, it's something that I really wanted them to have. And so it's not that you make any more or less money on a book than on an ebook. I just didn't want it that way. So some of it is thinking about the purpose of your book. And the only other thing I want to say is, for my first book, I also did an audio book. And that was a lot of fun. And because I had several people say, it's just going to be an audio book. And so I did that. And that is a whole different thing to do, but it was a lot of fun. It was exhausting, but it was fun. And it's really a kick to listen to yourself read your own book.
Well, thank you for that. Audrey, did you want to weigh in? I see you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about another comment on Amazon, and that is that on the marketing side, and I think one of the things that I've seen, since I had a book for sale on Amazon since 2011, and the same book is still there, and then I've added more, but it's a real, I mean, if you talk about the amount of time that it takes you to market your book and do that part of things, just the Amazon marketing alone and understanding their categories and understanding their algorithm and understanding what's hot today and what's not hot. And that is, I mean, I put a little bit of effort into that, probably not nearly as much as I should, but it's a big, if you want to really leverage Amazon and help your book sell the best it possibly can, that takes a lot of time. And I've also experimented, I'm currently experimenting with doing some advertising on Amazon. And, it's one of these things, I've had some results, not as good results as other people might have had, but I think that's also, I would have better results if I, spent half of each day, looking at what categories I'm advertising in and what keywords I'm using. And I just unfortunately don't have the bandwidth to do that. So again, it's you could pour almost unlimited amounts of time and energy into this. And it can be a little daunting, I will say.
So time seems to be a common theme here. Anyone else want to weigh in on this, Sarah?
Sarah, can I just make a quick comment, Ron? I think that what all of us are saying over and over in a way is, you really need to think about what is the purpose of this book. Because that, for me, that determined a lot of stuff. And so to just really soul search and think, why am I writing this book? And to get really clear about that, I think it helps a lot of decisions down the road.
Yeah, well said. So, Nancy, and then we'll open up to another question. Go right ahead.
Yeah, this is a little bit to the side, but in terms of like setting expectations, and also Audrey mentioned advertising. From what I've read pretty extensively, and this has been true for a number of years, advertising can be a really great way to reach readers, except the people that benefit from advertising are the people with multiple books. So especially in fiction, like series. So in general, you lose money on the first book because it costs more to advertise it than you're making back. But the reason that series do well is that then there's read through to that reader will go to your second book and hopefully all through the whole series without you paying for that advertising for those books. So advertising can be super tricky if you care about the bottom line.
Oh, no, thank you for that inside tip. questions, want to open it up to questions from the audience. Is there a question that you have about self-publishing? Just anything about the process?
I have a question.
Sure, go for it.
Hi, I'm Deb. So about 20 years ago, my husband and I authored a book that somebody mentioned earlier about you don't get to pick your title if you go with a publisher. And ours is called it's probably backwards, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Quitting Smoking, which I always feel like we're insulting our audience by the title. And I always end up apologizing for it for 20 years, explaining that it's just part of the Complete Idiot's Guides is, a set. But I wanted to update it. And so last year during the pandemic, we had extra time and we went ahead and updated it because we've been they gave the content back to us. They said, you have now the rights to all your contact. It was originally Macmillan Publishing, and then it became Penguin and Alpha Books. I don't even understand exactly how that all works, but they sent us the letter saying it's all yours, do what you want with it. You just have to not use our brand and formatting. So we took our content back, we updated it. Not a lot has changed for people who want to actually quit smoking. And it was actually a pretty popular book in that series. So I guess my question is, I would like to just self-publish it at this point. I'm just not sure how to do things like all the things you're talking about because I've never gone through the process, but also sort of how to capitalize on the fact that, we have a book and it's a follow-up to that book, and yet we have to be distinct, because we're not supposed to brand it. So I guess it could be, the authors of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Quitting Smoking now have this book and then give it a title. And we need to find probably a good editor and a designer for a new cover and things like that. I don't know what else I should be thinking about, and I don't know if anybody on the panel has suggestions.
Okay, well, so you had success, you're doing it a little bit differently. Does anyone want to add to that? What are some things, because it's going to be a new product, even though she has the basis of the product. Audrey, I'll start with you.
Good question. I think, nobody can really answer this for you, but I go back to the suggestion of going back to your purpose and really clarifying that. And if your purpose is, to get it out into the world as widely as possible, then you are going to have to either take on those tasks that we were talking about and just learn about. I mean, there's going to be that learning curve of, okay, what are my options for self-publishing, and should I do it through Amazon or should I do it through this other organization? And I forget now, I think it was Nancy who was saying there are, if you're willing to put in the time to research that, you can find a tremendous amount of fabulous information online. And, just even starting with Joanna Penn, and then she will lead you to other people and other people. And so you can start to gather, what do I need to do for the design? What do I need to do for the publishing, for the distribution? And so you can get a sense of that. And I kind of would recommend that anyway, even if you're going to go out and then, work with somebody else. So at least you have a little understanding of what they're talking about and whether they're giving you good advice when you're working with them. And then I had also thought, I wonder if you want to maybe think about possibly finding another publisher since you have the rights back now. Again, you might run into some of the same issues of, well, is it really timely? And, but maybe there are other series out there that it would fit into now that it's back from the Idiot's Guide. I don't know. So I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say, especially nonfiction folks.
So let's hear from that, and then we have some other questions and comments coming up. Anyone?
Could I comment as a former health librarian that there really hasn't been a groundbreaking new book, but there are some issues that you'd have to decide whether you want to take on: e-cigarettes, vaping, which are big issues.
That's how we've updated it. And there's only one new FDA approved medication, but our last book went global, and we would get emails from all over the world because it was translated into so many languages of people thanking us for helping them quit. And we wrote it with humor, but it's literally an area of expertise. There's very few people in the world that have the level of expertise I have in helping people quit smoking.
Well,
And
I mean,
say
obviously,
that
I'm
in
not in a
bragging way.
position to, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk
No,
over
I'm
you.
sorry. Yeah, no, the nicotine in all of its forms, and there's a whole global thing in the United States sees, any kind of nicotine is problematic. But we look at it from a science perspective. My co-author is a physician, and I'm a public health educator. So like we get the whole thing on the science of quitting smoking and all the options that are available to people, and how to quit vaping as well. So that's how we've updated it.
I think that the people here would be shocked to know how little there is published. That's my comment.
So,
Sarah, and then David.
Yeah, I just say quickly, Deb, and you may know this already, but I am in the middle of a trademark fight with a big company. I'm trying to trademark Prime Spark. They have very deep pockets. I don't. And so I would make sure when they say this is yours, you can do whatever you want. Is that exactly what it means? I mean, for example, can you say former writers of, the book you wrote before? Are you allowed to say that on the cover? Are you allowed to say that? Or are you not allowed to refer to that title at all? And I would find out all that legality stuff from them as you go along, rather than wait until the end and then have a problem, because you probably can't fight them
Well,
financially.
Good advice.
David, you had a comment?
yes, I joined an organization called Nonfiction Authors Association. Are you familiar with them, Deb?
Not yet.
Okay, so they are wonderful. The woman's name that put this together is Stephanie Chandler, and she's out of Sacramento. And she really concentrates on this whole genre. And so she is an incredible resource. I send her an email and she responds almost immediately to what my question would be, similar to yours. How would I go about addressing something like this? And she'll put me in touch with other people or send me an article. And they've always been so helpful. It was probably the best money I've ever spent in joining a professional organization. And she's international in scope. And she does a conference twice a year. And one of her speakers was, I think, is it Don Miguel Ruiz that did the 4 agreements? He was one of her speakers. So she's well connected in the writing community. And again, an excellent resource. I'm sure there is a comparable one, a group out there for the fiction writers, but she specifically focuses on nonfiction, which
Did
is
you
what
say
you're describing.
Did you say it's called Nonfiction Writers Association? or-
Nonfiction Authors Association. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So anyone else commenting on that? And we had a question from Julie, not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but who sold the most books and made the most money? Well, that's kind of a tough one, but we did get some responses that, Audrey said sometimes things they're tough, and David's been having steady royalty, and Nancy's in the black, and so that's a question. And then I had a question from Anna. I want to publish to help establish my authority. So the actuality of the topic is not so pertinent for me, but that I need to manage my expectations on the profit. So any final thoughts on that? Okay. And Audrey says she has epiphany about making money from books a few years ago. Essentially consider myself through my paying work as a patron of the arts for my fiction writing. It helps me think about it. And Nancy gives independent authors. And Sarah mentions doing a lot of readings generates royalty, and that's you're not going to get rich on it, but it's something to consider. And Mariel says there's a lot of content always being put online on different platforms, YouTube forums, etc.? How does that compare to actual publishing a book? What about ebooks or forums have been on content is often so extensive, in-depth, thoughtful, and well-written? Anyone want to comment about that, of other forms of paid books? Yeah, Nancy.
I'll just do a little comment on YouTube. I'm not exactly sure this is what you meant, but my son had a YouTube channel that he was earning a fair amount of money from. It was enough to pay his rent with a roommate. And he found it was a horrible grind because you really have to put it out there every day and really work at the SEO, the search engine optimization. And he eventually stopped it because it was just it was like wearing him down.
Okay. Anyone else?
So one of the things I want to bring up is if you're considering writing a book, what I learned from this whole process was you probably want to start, believe it or not, with a marketing plan. So who is your audience? What is your budget? How are you going to promote your book? What are your various venues? And then what I'm working on now that I did not do for my first book, but learned the value, testimonials and endorsements. So it's really about getting named people to endorse your book. Deb, with your book on the non-smoking, you already have your testimonials from people for whom it's made a difference. I definitely would consider that as part of the introduction to your book or on the book cover. But again, it is quite a challenge. And if I had had all of that in place beforehand, I think it would have made the self-publishing not easier, but more structured. So these are all the things that you definitely want to think about. And when you're out there promoting your book, how are you going to go about doing it? I mean, right now with COVID, we're somewhat limited in-person talks, but are you doing webinars, on Zoom? What are you doing? Podcasts, okay? That's the other thing I'm pursuing now, getting on podcasts with people and talking about my book. Being on the radio, how do I connect with those people? On television, just speaking engagements. It's all of the things that work for you, where your strengths are. And in some cases, you have to stretch yourself out of your comfort zone.
So all good parts about thinking about marketing. Julie asks, and somewhat related, how does the public hear about books if there aren't at a bookstore or on Amazon? Nancy, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I think David said it well. Online events have become super easy to do, and podcasts, I think, is a huge outlet. I have a friend who this month is publishing a book with a traditional publisher, and she had a very sizable advance. So she had probably the big guns of marketing behind her, and they have advised her to do, and this was planning before Delta became a kind of a big issue this month, but with the assumption that in-person events can happen. And they advised her to have one book signing at a bookstore, and the rest is all with book influencers on podcasts. It's super cost effective to do. It's fast, and you can reach more people.
Anyone else? And then we're starting to get a lot of comments and questions, and we're kind of winding down. Anyone else? Julie mentions, to play the devil's advocate, what if I self-publish and it becomes a huge hit? Is there a chance that a traditional publisher, now what little I know, I could say the answer is a big yes. They're looking at you as a self-publisher to see if you have a market, they'll pick it up. For example, What Color Is Your Parachute with Richard Bowles? That's sold, I don't know, 10 or 11 million copies, but he self-published it first, and then he got an audience, and they said, wait, 10 Speed said, we've got to pick this guy up. Anyone else want to comment on that? Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I had a larger publisher, not one of the huge ones, but a larger publisher want to pick up my downsizing book. And I explored it with them, and I didn't want to get into it. The contract that was offered and what they were talking about, I didn't want to have anything to do with. So yes, that can happen. And as with everything else, you really need to read what it is you're signing and really talk to them about what does this mean if you don't understand it. Because it was, as far as I could tell, it was a no-win situation for me in terms of my major intention for the book, which was to help people.
Well, that's something to hear the personal view, but all booksellers are looking at numbers, right? And so they're, Audrey, do you want to comment about that? About self-published to traditional market?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there have been a few notable crossovers. And it's, again, it's sort of how much you put into it as a self-published author, sort of leading you to that success. I mean, it's pretty rare. I think Hugh Howey, I don't know if anybody's heard of him. He self-published his first book, Wool, and that was then very successful and got picked up. And then there has been some crossover in the other way, in the other direction. There have been some fairly successful traditionally published authors who have decided to go it on their own, partly for some of the reasons we talked about before. They wanted more control. They wanted a bigger chunk of the financial pie to keep for themselves.
Thank you for that. We're winding down here, so maybe we'll ask for a quicker answer. Lemming says, I have a question about the hybrid model. How do you generally go about finding a good independent editor publisher? Do you want to handle that, Sarah?
I don't think I can be helpful with that. Someone introduced me to the woman I worked with, and I don't know. I don't know how I would find someone other than that.
I put it in the chat a couple places. Reedsy, which is a for-profit company, but they do recommendations, and Ally also has resources that they have sort of vetted. And I didn't have the Ally link handy. That's the authors, the Alliance of Independent Authors.
Okay, thank you for that. Deb has, do nonfiction writers do book signings as well? Anyone?
Yes, they do.
Yes, I answered saying I've done a lot of book signings and readings with my first nonfiction book. I haven't with my second one because it was all COVID. I don't know if I would have been able to, but I did with my first one. And it was at bookstores, and also for the book I had, it was with real estate agencies. So you have to think about, what's a good market for your book, and contact whomever that might be that might have an interest in the topic of your book. But yeah, I did a lot.
Can I just say that during the last year, book events online have been very popular, just so you know.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh in? And we have just a final couple of questions. Julie asked, does anyone do Instagram or advertise their books on it? Anyone experience with Instagram?
The library does.
Okay.
So, Ron, very quickly, we've not really talked about the cost of publishing with self-publishing. And I think it would be important for people to just have a general sense of what that could be, because that's, I think, important. So on my first book, I worked with Upwork, which is a company that helps with editing. And what you do is you hire by putting in a proposal with a cost that you want to pay. And then you get those responses and you choose from there. I would say that for my first book, overall, between ebook and getting an editor and a number of other costs, it was about $2,500 out of pocket. With the second two books, I decided to go with the same editor. And because we already had a working relationship and she already had a lot of the content for the workbook, that overall cost between the two books was less than $1,000.
Wow.
Okay, and so that's what you would be looking at. I'm not doing the ebook. The ebook cost me $700 to do for the first book. These are just figures. They're not exacts, but just ballpark so you know what you might be dealing with in terms of out of pocket.
Anyone else want to quickly weigh on that, and then we'll just wind down? Or we'll, okay. Well, you know, I want to make sure we're appreciate everyone's time. Nancy, any final thoughts as we wind down the program?
Just that I feel we may have scared people off, but I've just found it a really interesting and fun process. And if you're doing it, if you're really clear about your own reasons to do self-publishing, I think it's quite a ride.
I had
Great.
a quick question and a comment, super quick. Paul Jarvis, the author of Company of One, which is a great book, by the way, if you're going off on your own. He did like an interview, it's on YouTube, where he talked about he published with a publishing, formal publishing house first, and then he self-published, and then he's decided he's going to probably self-publish in the future because everything else was the same, and then you had all the benefits that were mentioned earlier. So I thought people might want to check out what he had to say about that topic. And I was just going to ask about the designer for the book cover. Are there some parameters on how much that costs?
Mine was $35.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh in?
I did mine through 99 Designs, which is kind of a different format, and it was $300.
Okay,
That's about what I paid for mine as well, 300.
so you got
And-
a good
Yeah,
base.
somebody asked me that, and I can't remember, but I think it was something between $300 and $500.
Okay, so
We went back and forth a lot because I'm picky.
So we heard from Nancy. Audrey, last minute comment as we wind down?
I think I would just say, yeah, don't be scared, because there really is, if you have a passion for a story that you want to tell or a message that you want to get out into the world, go for it. There's really nothing like that feeling of having something that's inside of you that wants to get out there. And then when it is, and you start seeing the impact it's having on people, it's really, it still gives me chills, even though I've done it many times. So don't be scared is my message.
Thank you for that. How about you, Sarah?
I would just double score what Audrey said. I mean, I think one of the most exciting days of my life was opening the box the first time and there were my books. There was my book. And it was such an up. And the only thing that was more of an up is when you hear from somebody that you don't know to telling you how helpful your book has been. There's nothing better than that. So if you can't do it completely on your own in self-publishing, go the hybrid model, because that you can absolutely do it with that.
And finally, you, David?
Well, all I can say is it's been a wild ride and worth every moment of it. I wouldn't change it for anything for what I've learned.
Well, see, and they're the ones that invested their time and energy and money. And we did get a question about trademark. How long is the process? Does anyone want to quickly answer that?
Well, the book itself is copyrighted when it's written. And so you only have to trademark something if you have something to trademark. I have a logo for Prime Spark and I wanted to trademark that. But if you have a book with a cover, you don't have to trademark that unless it's you want to have that as your trademark on your logo for your company.
Okay,
I
so
think that intellectual property is a whole nother talk, but can I just out loud thank everyone so much? I really enjoyed this talk.
yeah, I want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring it, Nancy Branca, and do check out everyone's books here. They're all great books. Audrey Cullman, Dr. David Petrove, and Dr. Sarah Hart. And thank you all for attending, and we had a good dialogue. On behalf of Phase 2 Careers and Friends of the Library, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everybody. This was fun.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.